Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Kneebar MMA podcast. I'm Johnny Brown alongside Nolan King. Later on, we'll be joined by UFC middleweight Bubba Bush. How you doing today, Nolan?
Pretty good, man. I upheld my end of the bargain. We have an awesome guest coming up talking about his UFC fight in Dublin. Bubba Bush taking on Gareth McClellan, so I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to talking about this weekend. Super stoked for the card, UFC 192. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's just start. Let's kind of go on from last week. We had two fight cards. Bellator 143 took place at the State Farm Arena there, with Joe Warren taking on LC Davis. Let's just cover that one real quick. Some of the undercard we talked about on our last podcast. Dan Charles, Chase Gormley. This one a little bit of a shocker. Dan Charles with the knockout in the second round, and it was a pretty interesting fight. I think Dan Charles, he was lobbying after the fight for the Bobby Lashley rematch, but man, that's a huge win for Dan Charles.
Yeah, that was awesome. It was a very brutal knockout. I mean, Gormley's a guy that has a really good chin too. This was a fun matchup, good matchmaking on Richard Cho's part, and I was happy with it. And we'll be interesting to see where Charles goes from here if he can build on it. He's had a great team down with Ryan Bader at Power MMA and Fitness, Aaron Simpson, his head coach. I'm looking forward to see where he goes from here.
Yeah, the other prelim we kind of touched on. Darian Caldwell defeated Sean Bunch by submission, rear naked choke at about 2 minutes and 35 seconds of the first round. Obviously, they both had really good wrestling credentials going into their MMA careers, but Darian Caldwell looks like the real deal, and I believe he should get a title shot with maybe another win or two. What do you think about that, Nolan?
Yeah, I agree, man. He's at the top of that division. I'd give him top 6 or so. Hopefully we'll see him get that shot at some point. Maybe he can fight. LC Davis was a matchup I was looking at maybe for him to take on next. But yeah, man, he deserves a step up in competition because Sean Bunch is actually a pretty solid, mixed martial artist with a great wrestling background. So definitely need to step up for him.
Yeah, Sean Bunch, honestly, just my opinion. Obviously, I'm not a doctor or not a physician. He almost looks like he could go down to 125. He looks like a small 135er. That's just my opinion when I watched the match. I've also thought that before. He's kind of small for the weight class. Bellator doesn't really have a flyweight division, but that's always something interesting to see. Maybe he does drop down, maybe in another organization. But like you said, he's a great wrestling prospect, and I think he'll be back as well. Let's jump onto the main card. The first fight was two heavyweights taking the opening bout between Vinicius Spartan and Everton Teixeira. Everton Teixeira was just 3-0 coming in the fight, but he has a great kickboxing background. Vinicius Spartan won by arm triangle choke in the second round. It's a pretty decent fight, though. I think Everton Teixeira kind of shocked me at 3-0. I didn't think he had much of a ground game. He didn't look totally lost, even though he falls to 3-1, doesn't have a lot of experience. I think Bellator should keep him on the roster, maybe get him another fight here soon because he's an interesting prospect. Obviously has good striking credentials, and a lot of those guys from K1 that don't have a lot of experience. A lot of the big knock on them obviously is they're not great on the ground, but he didn't look that bad. He did get caught in a submission, but it wasn't like he was a day one guy, someone who never really grappled before. What did you think about that fight?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I mean, obviously it was a bit of a mismatch once they got in there. On paper, I thought it looked, Everton Teixeira has a lot of promise, that's for sure. But I think Vinicius Spartan is as good as a Bellator heavyweight as you're going to find. Not an easy matchup to take in your, fourth pro fight or fifth pro fight, whatever it was for Teixeira. I think he's definitely got some promise, but I think he bit off a little bit more than he could chew early on in his career.
Yeah, he's a guy that he's a guy that, like you said, had a lot of promise, and hopefully, maybe they'll bring him back and get someone a little less experienced or a little bit less notable as Vinicius Spartan, because that is a tough matchup. Our next fight was a featherweight between two prospects. Very close fight, Emmanuel Sanchez versus Henry Corrales. Emmanuel Sanchez picked up the victory by split decision. This was an interesting fight. Both these guys looked really good. What was your opinion on the fight? And I think, in my opinion, both these guys have a future in the UFC, in the Bellator featherweight division. It was a good fight and fun.
Yeah, definitely a fun one. Pretty evenly matched. There was some wild stuff going on, triangles and submissions. Definitely one that got the fans excited during that show. I thought honestly the card overall was very good. A lot of exciting fights, but What stuck out to me here is Bellator is building some legitimate main card fighters from the base up. Emmanuel Sanchez, they gave him Pat Curran, I believe, uh, his last fight before the Corrales fight, and then Corrales fought on the tentpole event. I forget, was it against Daniel Strauss? Is that who we fought?
Yes, it was. It's the one back in June, I believe, on the
Right.
Kimbo versus Shamrock card.
Right. So I mean, they give these guys exposure, and they're deserving fighters. I think they are UFC caliber. I don't think they'd be on the main card in the UFC yet, but they're guys that they can build on. People know who they are. People are going to look forward to seeing both of these guys come. When they step back in there. So while Coker's throwing these Kimbo Shamrock fights out there and Fedor and Kotor and all this stuff, I think if you look at it from top to bottom, they are building some stars and they are building some good prospects, and this was just an example of that.
Yeah, fun fight, two up and comers, and I agree with you. They're building some solid talent from the ground up. Our next fight is Kendall Grove versus Joey Beltran. Maybe the opposite of what you were saying earlier. Two guys who have been established in other organizations for quite a while. Um, this fight was pretty close there for a while. Kendall Grove seemed to be first to the punch the entire fight though, and he finished it at 2 minutes and 27 seconds into the third round with a punch. Joey Beltran's not a tough guy to finish. He dropped down to 185. This is his second fight at middleweight, and he had his moments, but Kendall Grove dominated and finished him. Kendall Grove, every time you think he's done, maybe he's not able to be in the title picture. Lost to Brandon Halsey not too long ago. He takes a big win, and he's still in that maybe that top tier of Bellator middleweights.
Yeah, I mean, what an impressive showing by Grove. He goes out there and he fights the exact kind of fight that Joey Beltran likes to get into. Not only that, he ends up finishing Joey Beltran, who is known to have a very solid chin. You have to have some serious knockout power in order to finish him. So yeah, I was really impressed when I saw that. When I saw Joey go down, I know Joey didn't like the stoppage. I thought it was completely justified, and it'll be interesting to see where Grove goes from here. Maybe he'll, if Halsey ends up beating Carvalho, I think that's definitely a possibility right there.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting fight for sure. And then the main event was a bantamweight bout, obviously number one contender bout. Joe Warren taking on LC Davis. I have to eat my crow. I thought LC Davis would be a little more game for this fight. It was pretty much a dominating fight by Joe Warren. A lot of people were complaining it wasn't their favorite fight, the most entertaining fight. But hey, Joe Warren gets it done whether you like it or not as far as his fighting style. Pretty much complete domination from this one. And Joe Warren, it looks like he's going to get a rematch for either Galvo or Dantes, whoever wins here in a couple months. So this is an interesting main event, but Joe Warren takes it. And what was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the most exciting fight ever, but I think that Joe Warren gets into these types of fights sometimes when he's got a guy that can't really neutralize his wrestling, and be able to put out some offense. I think that happens. I also think the eye poke probably inhibited his fighting. Past that point, I don't know how much of a difference it made. He scratched his cornea. It came out yesterday. But yeah, I think Bellator's 135 division. They get a couple more guys in here, some more top talent. I think the UFC's 135 division's pretty weak. If they end up stealing a couple of guys who want sponsorship money, who want to get paid a little more, end up stealing them from the UFC, they could have a pretty competitive bantamweight division with the UFC. But Warren has one fight left on his contract, I believe, or maybe he's done. I thought I read that somewhere. So
Yeah, I think this was his last fight from what I read as
right.
well.
So it will be interesting to see if he ends up. He's old. He's getting up there in age, and it'll be interesting to see if he has any, anything he wants to get off of his bucket list before he retires and maybe sign with the UFC. But if I had to guess, I'd say stick with Bellator. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think he's a Bellator guy. He's always even before Scott Coker took over, he was one of Bjorn Rebney's guys that he really promoted. Was on the Fight Master show as a coach. It'd be interesting to see him in the UFC. There's a lot of good matchups for him, but I kind of lean towards he's a Bellator guy. He's been there since usually really the beginning pretty much. He's been there, so it should be interesting though. I kind of like to see Joe Soto. Joe Warren rematch. It was a great fight back in the day at featherweight, and that'd be an interesting fight. I'm just saying.
Yeah, man, that would be a great one.
Yeah, let's jump on to the next day, Saturday. We saw UFC Japan. Interesting fight card. We'll start from the bottom. We had the first fight was Roger Zapata versus Shinzo Anzai. As I heard a couple different pronunciations. That looks like the official one from the UFC. This was a pretty interesting fight. Roger Zapata, he was a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience. He ended up injuring his hand in the third round. I think it was like a minute in the third round, actually 47 seconds into the third round. Um, you know, not the, it was a good fight to kick things off, but kind of disappointing the way it ended. What do you think about that fight? And any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much sums up Roger Zapata's career thus far in the UFC, injury after injury. Unfortunate to see something, kind of stupid like that, just like a broken finger. That's the reaction I think most guys would have, you know, if it was broken that badly. And I don't discredit him and Zai. I think was looking good up until that point, and there's not much else I can say about it other than, hopefully Zapata doesn't take too long off in between his next fight.
Yeah, he's a
The next
guy.
one.
Yeah, he's a guy. I thought Anzai was looking pretty good in that fight as well, as far as on the scorecards. But Zapata's a guy that seems to have some promise. He's still inexperienced, so it'd be glad to see him. It'd be good to see him back before too long. Our next fight was a lightweight bout between Cajun Johnson and Katana, and Cajun Johnson won this one by unanimous decision. It was almost a complete domination. I think Katani had that last round was maybe a little bit of a comeback as far as he looked pretty good in the third round if I'm not mistaken, but he's a guy that is now 0-5 in the UFC. Do you cut him? I think you have to at this point.
Yeah, I think you have to cut him at this point. His second stint, like you said, he's 0-5. Overall in the two stints that he's had. I don't think he really threw a punch in the first couple of rounds. I recognize that his stand up is not what his strong suit is. But man, you got to throw some punches if you're in there. It's easy for me to say because I'm not getting punched in the face, but if you want to, I think if you want to succeed, you got to sharpen up all aspects of your game. Yeah, he did look kind of sharp in that third round. He got Johnson down at one point. But yeah, that was all Cajun Johnson for the most part. Katani can take a beating, man. I tell you that he hit some big shots, and Johnson, I think will hopefully get a little bit better of a competition in his next fight.
Yeah, our next bout, going on from that was another lightweight when Nick Hein defeated Yusuke Kasuya by unanimous decision. Not that, in my opinion, it wasn't that interesting of a fight. I don't know what you thought. Nick Hein, I thought was kind of taking a step back down, fighting a newcomer to the organization. I don't really have much to say about this fight. Like I said, I think Nick Hein should have been fighting someone a little higher caliber. But that, I knew he wanted to be on the fight card, so good for him. What was your impression on that fight?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to see more out of Nick Hein. I think that this was more of the Nick Hein that we saw when he fought James Vick. It was kind of a little more tentative. I think he was kind of laid back a little bit too past the point that he should have been. And I think Kasuya was better than I think everybody expected him to be. He was relatively unknown. I remember seeing this fight get announced and being like, why are they giving Hein a new guy, from a market that's not very, from a circuit that is not very good overall. They're Asian MMA. We talked about this last week. Still is in the developmental stages, I think. So yeah, I thought it was a weird matchup, and it wasn't really, Hein obviously won. He wasn't really ever in trouble, but he should have had more of a dominant performance, in my opinion, if he wanted to make a push for that, to get out of that prospect role.
Yeah, you kind of had a good point. He was kind of almost passive a little bit. I mean, he did win the fight, but he was a little laid back, and that was kind of where I was looking for. I guess it didn't come to my head, but yeah, definitely was not the impressive performance that he probably should have had. That may have boosted him up a little bit in the standings, as far as that goes. The next fight was actually one of my favorites from the night. I think it's Kieta Nakamura defeated Li Jingliang, the Leech. Kind of some hard to pronounce names. I don't want to butcher them too bad. That was a great fight. The Leech had him hurt, early in the first or second, I believe. He had him hurt pretty bad. Nakamura had a great, as he jumped on his back. It was kind of like a smooth little transition, choked him out. He fell forward, and that was just a beautiful submission. Nakamura, who had fought in the UFC against like Rob Emerson and some of those guys quite a few years ago, he definitely impressed in his comeback. That's for sure.
Yeah, man, and a night full of dominating performances. That was a great comeback, and to be down on the scorecards, getting kind of beat up a little bit, and Nakamura to pull off that awesome submission. One of the submission of the year candidates, in my opinion. I don't remember the last time that I saw a guy, pass out from getting choked in a standing rear naked choke. So that was awesome. Definitely look forward to seeing him again. This is a rare instance, or not necessarily a rare instance, but more times than not when fighters return from to get in their second stint in the UFC, a lot of times it kind of ends up like the first. But Nakamura looked good, man, and he's been away from the UFC for a long time, so it's pretty thrilling to see him pull off that one.
Yeah, it was a great fight, and actually, I think the next fight I actually might have liked even better. It was both these two fights, in my opinion, were the best fights of the night. Mizuta Hirota versus Teruto Ishihara. This is the final for the UFC Road to Japan. Both these guys brung it. It was a great fight. I think the only time ever that Ultimate Fighter finale fight has went to a draw. I thought they may do a fourth round. I know in the at least on the United States versions of the show, they always say there's going to be a fourth round if there is a somehow there's a tie. There was no fourth round. Both guys got the contract, and I think they both deserved it. Nolan, what do you think about that? Do you think that
Yeah, that
was
was a great fight, and it was a lot. It was actually pretty high level in my opinion. The tough Japan, tough China, tough Latin America. Sometimes the finale fights are a little underwhelming. Sometimes you have one guy that looks pretty good, like Yair Rodriguez for tough Latin America, and you say, okay, that guy is definitely UFC caliber, but everybody else isn't. I think both these guys were UFC caliber. I thought Hirota put on a good showing. If I was scoring the fight, I think I would have scored a little bit towards Ishihara if I had to pick a winner. But honestly, man, that was so close. Ishihara was kind of, I wouldn't say disrespectful, but he wasn't showing much respect to Hirota. But Hirota hung in there and did pretty well, and against a very, much younger prospect.
Yeah, that's a great. You summed it up pretty well. I actually thought I'd score it for Ishihara as well. Hirota had his moments, so it was a very close fight. And I agree, man. It's good to see Hirota back in there. He went 0-2, I believe, in his original UFC stint about 2013 or so. So it's good to see him back. And Ishihara, man, I kind of downplayed how good I thought he was. I didn't know he was that good, and then he turns out to be a really, at least in that fight, he showed a lot of promise, and he's a guy to watch, I believe. And
Right,
I,
and I always say, I've said this before. I think this is a pretty telling, not telling, but this is a pretty good rule of thumb to go on. Is you can I never like picking the tough finale fights. The first fights outside of the house for these guys, because I think once they get a full training camp under their once they get a full training camp, they end up turning out a lot better or a lot worse than you would expect them to be. Perfect instances of this was the tough finale with Eddie Gordon and Diego Lima. Lima was kind of the odds-on favorite to win. He got smoked. So I think being at your own gym, being able to know who your opponent is, and not having that grueling schedule, changes fighters, from how they appear on the house. So I think it's always good to take a grain of salt when picking those fights.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think Ishihara is probably a bantamweight, a natural bantamweight, so I expect to see him go down. I believe Hiroto fought at featherweight in the UFC before, so he may stick around at that weight. But both two guys, interesting to see how they do in the UFC. Let's jump into the next fight, which was over pretty much before it started almost. Diego Brandao versus Katsunori Kakuno. A quick 28 seconds, a bull rush by Diego Brandao. I think you called this. I thought Kakuno may give him some problems, but Brandao, he always had that strong start. He usually fades down the stretch, but always that strong first round. He goes out there and just blitzkriegs him, wins in 28 seconds. Impressive win for Diego Brandao. Kakuno, I think he falls to 2-3 in the UFC. I don't know if he'll get cut or not, but there's a possibility. He has that strange fighting style, the stance, which is awesome to see, but it almost seems like it's not very, it doesn't. It's very haphazard for fighting in the UFC, or not. Excuse me, very hazardous fighting in the UFC at such a high level, because it seems like a lot of guys can hit him with that
Right,
stance.
it is hazardous, but I think sometimes he's able to, when he's not facing these ridiculously powerful strikers, he's able to utilize it to his advantage. I think he's had a tough run in the UFC. I think it's more his opponents he fought not only have been bad matches, but they've been guys that have gone on to be very, recognized as very talented fighters. Kevin Souza, Tony Ferguson. So those aren't easy matchups. And Brandao was just stylistically, I thought it was one of the worst matchups for Kakuno that he could have. A guy that loves to come out and swing and hurt people in the first round. Give kind of like leave it all in the octagon in the first round in some instances. I thought that was not a good matchup, but hopefully we see him back. Brando, on the other hand, I think people are kind of underestimating him at this point. Especially if he can get his cardio under control. I thought the Hedis fight, his cardio did look very good. His only two losses really in the UFC, as of late were Poirier and McGregor. Those are two guys that you should not be ashamed about losing to. So hopefully they give him another step up, and I do think that he's here to stay for a while.
Yeah, man, Diego Brindle's a really interesting guy fighting at 145 pounds. Like you said, a lot of people counted him out, but he's only lost to the top guys, top 15 guys for sure. The next fight was kind of disappointing. I thought it might be a little more exciting. Takeya Mizugaki, longtime veteran, taking on another longtime veteran, George Roop. A clear-cut win for Mizugaki. Was kind of a fight that it was a lot in the clinch. That was like, against the cage. That was, a good 80-70% of the fight, it seemed like. Mizugaki talked afterwards. He was extremely emotional, even in tears after the fight during his interview after the fight, and he kind of speculated that he thought he might get cut in this fight if he lost. He said he might, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said he kind of considered this his last fight. I don't know if he meant that as maybe he's going to retire down the road or something, or maybe the way I took it is that he could be cut because it's his third loss. That's kind of how I took it. So he maybe fought a little more conservative. And George Roop, it takes two to tango. He kind of fought. He got tagged a couple times. He kind of like he fought not to lose, in my opinion. I know it's easy for me to say, but not my favorite fight. I thought it was going to be a little better. What do you think about that,
Yeah,
Nolan?
I mean, I was a little disappointed about it. We had talked about last week how there were certain guys in the UFC that you could put in against anybody, no matter what type of a winning or losing streak they were on. And I was saying Roop was one of those guys. Yeah, I thought this was kind of what everybody that would disagree with me last week would think would have happened. Mizugaki just kind of bullied Roop around. Roop didn't do much. I mean, I give him credit. He hung in there. He did throw some good shots. He wasn't, he was trying. But I just think that was kind of odd matchmaking. But yeah, I think Mizugaki's kind of, we know where he stands there. I don't think he'll ever make a title push, but I think he's a guy that's definitely worthy of being in the top 15, top 10 range, and I think he'll get back to fighting ranked opponents now.
And then we had our next fight, which is flyweight. Kyoji Horiguchi recently just fought Demetrius Johnson for the UFC flyweight title. Took on Chico Camus. This was a pretty it's one of those fights where Chico Camus is so tough. He stands in there. He's game. You can put him against almost anyone, and he'll put up a good fight. Horiguchi is just too much. This is kind of two guys that I don't know how you see it. It was to break it down, it was a unanimous decision for Horiguchi. If I'm UFC, Horiguchi's still very young. I kind of try to groom him a little bit, maybe not throw him in there against the toughest guys again. He's already, let him build himself back up to the title shot. Chico Camus, man, this guy is so tough. But yeah, I'd give him a step down opponent. He's just coming off two killers, Cejudo and Horiguchi, so I give him a little break. Do you agree with me, Nolan? And how'd you think of the fight? What'd you think about the fight?
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised. I thought Horiguchi would win, but I didn't think he'd be that dominant. I mean, Cejudo just fought Keimu, and I think Keimu had much easier time with Cejudo than he did with Horiguchi. I think Horiguchi's, he's only 24 years old. He may have been rushed to the title shot a little bit, but I think down the line, imagine in 2 years what he's going to be like. 4, 5, 6 more fights under his belt in the UFC against some top guys. Man, I think he's a prospect to watch, and I think, if Mighty Mouse is, ends up going up to 135 eventually, you might be looking at a guy that could be potentially the champion in a couple of years. I think maybe a matchup with John Moraga might be good for him next, somebody like that, a little more experienced. And, Keimu, I think, definitely has earned his spot in the top 15 as well. I think he'll be more of a gatekeeper role, maybe a fight of Wilson Hayes next, somebody like that. But yeah, I'm interested to see where both these guys go. And man, Horiguchi's, I'm really high up on him at this point.
Yeah, I was thinking Horiguchi versus Dustin Ortiz, but I agree with your matchup. That's a solid one as well. I thought Chico Camus versus Chris Bill give him a little easier fight. Chris Bill's don't give me no cakewalk, but maybe a little fight that's not a ranked fighter for Camus. But that was a great, I agree 100%. Those matches you were talking about would be awesome as well. Let's jump into the co-main event. This biggest shocker of the night, and I had to eat crow for this one. I think you might as well. Uriah Hall pulls off the upset. Knocks out Gegard Mousasi with a spinning kick, then hit a flying knee, and then it was just punches that finished it at just 25 seconds of the second round. If you follow me on Twitter, you may know my reaction. I was not necessarily thrilled with this result. I think Uriah Hall is a talented guy, and I got to give him props for winning. It was a solid performance, but he was getting dominated the first round. It may not been a 10-8 round, but it was close to it. It was a complete domination from Mousasi. The next round opens, Uriah Hall throws that crazy kick. Musasi's coming in. I'm not trying to discredit Uriah Hall. Props to him, but I definitely feel like Musasi kind of got caught just in a bad position and couldn't recover. Props to Uriah. He landed a flying knee shortly after and finished it. Big win for Uriah Hall. Big loss for Musasi. Again, though, Uriah Hall, who knows? Maybe the verdict wasn't out on him. Maybe he's still got, yeah, he's going to get some more wins. Musasi, heartbreaking loss, to say the least. What do you think about the fight, Nolan? Who do you want to see these guys fight
Yeah,
next?
man, it was definitely interesting. I think it was definitely the highlight of my night to see such a big upset like that. Uriah Hall's never really been proven, never been consistent, and he's fighting a guy who, is. I think he's he's kind of. I'm not gonna say gatekeeper. He's better than that. He's kind of the gatekeeper to the upper echelon of the division. He's below Jacare Romero, Rockhold Weidman, but he's better than everybody else in my opinion. Kind of like sort of like Michael Bisping is in a similar situation. But yeah, man, that was a shocker. 30, whatever it was, 30 or 5 or 40 pro fights for Musasi, something crazy like that. He's never been knocked out, and Hall catches him with a spinning kick. I think it should have been, it was thrown to go to the body. Some people are debating that he knew Musasi was going to duck in, so he threw it. I know you're very passionate on this issue, but yeah, I mean, back to what you were saying about maybe it was lucky or not. I think that personally, I agree and disagree with that. I think that luck in MMA is kind of something you can't really necessarily throw out there. I don't think anything's ever lucky, because I don't know. I think you could make an argument for a lot of knockouts. But with that being said, for people to come out and say that this was thrown intentionally is a totally different story. I think this kick was not thrown intentionally to the head. I think it was supposed to go to the body. Everything else after that was obviously intentional. I think it was a phenomenal knockout, highlight reel. Great moment in Uriah Hall's career, most exciting moment of the night. I saw this knockout covered on media outlets that don't really cover MMA, Barstool Sports. I was on the front page of Yahoo Sports at one point. So this is getting some, it's a lot of good publicity for Uriah Hall, and it's definitely one that will be played in the maybe the opening package at UFC events, Teenage Wasteland, Bob O'Reilly.
Oh yeah, I could see that being in there. And as far as let's go in the main event, I suppose we have two heavyweights fighting: Josh Barnett, Roy Nelson. This fought was a unanimous decision for Josh Barnett. Roy Nelson had a couple moments in there, but Barnett looked phenomenal. I know me and you questioned his layoff, how he's going to look. I know we kind of leaned towards Roy Nelson, maybe pulling the upset, but Josh Barnett looked fantastic. Uh, pretty much won at least I think he won every round besides maybe the first on my scorecards. I had to look at, rewatch it maybe. I was, so late. I don't remember exactly what round was which, but I definitely think Roy Nelson probably won the first round, and then every other round was Josh
Yeah, I
Barnett.
agree.
Uh,
Go ahead.
I was just saying that's how I scored it off the top of my head. How about Barnett, Nolan? What'd you think, man? He looked just
Yeah.
amazing, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. That's an example of a guy that clearly didn't skip a beat. I think he actually came out a lot better than he did in the Travis fight. Man, he's in shape. It looked like Barnett did 5 years ago. And it was a great showing. I think that's exactly what the heavyweight division needs. A couple months ago, we were saying the heavyweight division was really stacked, and there were a lot of guys in the mix. And now I feel like the Kane rematch is kind of going to force all these other heavyweight fights to take place and knock people off. Frank Mir's obviously kind of been out of the picture now. Arlovsky had a disappointing showing, so he's kind of out of the immediate picture. Stipe's fighting Rothwell and JDS is fighting Overeem, so that will knock two other guys out of the picture. So it's good to get somebody else back in there, a guy that can contend, a guy that's in the top. I put him in the top 6, I think, right now. There's a lot of interesting matchups for him. And I think he's exactly what they needed. His game plan was awesome. I think he just dominated Roy from the start of the second round to the end of the fifth round.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It was a great fight for Josh Barnett, and he looked impressive. It was an interesting night of fights at the UFC Fight Night in Japan. I thought the event overall was pretty good. Some of the matches were kind of dominating in dominating fashion, but overall I'd give the event probably a C
Yeah,
plus, maybe a B minus. I thought it was pretty
yeah,
good.
I was all right. I would have liked. I mean, for what it was good. On paper, I wasn't expecting it to be like, UFC 194 is going to be or something like that. But yeah, I was all right. I'd give it a C. Could have been worse.
Now let's welcome in this week's guest here on the Kneebar MMA podcast. Is UFC middleweight and former Legacy fighting middleweight champion, the Fighting Texas Aggie, Bubba Bush. Bubba will be taking on Gareth McClellan at UFC Fight Night Dublin on October 24th. Bubba, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now let's ask you right off the bat. We haven't seen you in for over a year. What is the reasoning behind this little break, and what have you been up to?
Yeah, I had surgery after the last fight. So October 15th of last year, I actually had surgery on my right elbow. I had a UCL completely severed. I think I heard it in training. Actually, I think Jake Hume hit me in the head. I blocked it, but elbow came in, wrist and shoulder stayed out, and I think it tore that ligament. And then I kept fighting on it for about a year. I figured it was tendonitis, just kept swelling up, and I'd get it under control, and I'd fight. So I actually fought on it 3 times, and at some point in there, it just totally severed. And I couldn't get the swelling under control. I couldn't, deal with it anymore. I couldn't keep fighting, so I had to go get it MRI'd and then fixed.
Now, one of those fights that you're obviously talking about was your last fight, your UFC debut back at UFC 175, International Fight Week. You took on Kevin Casey. You unfortunately ended up on the losing end of that one, but it was later overturned to a no contest. What went wrong in that fight? And were you able to take anything out of it? Use it as a learning experience at all?
You're fading out on me a little bit, but I think, what did I take out of it?
Yeah, I can repeat it if you want. Your last fight against Kevin Casey, you were unfortunately on the losing end of that one. It was overturned later on. What went wrong in that fight, and what did you take out of it? Was it a learning experience for you at all?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on there. It was a hugely busy weekend, all the UFC jitters and everything else tied into that. But mostly, as far as the things that I can work on, not rushing in, being more comfortable in the cage. And I think it's the first time in at that level, but being more comfortable in the fight is going to be huge. Not rushing things, letting it happen rather than forcing it. So it's big.
And like I just mentioned, the outcome of the fight was overturned. Casey tested positive for an anabolic steroid, just standalone. What was your reaction when you heard this?
I was not shocked. Honestly, I was coming out of that fight, and I was just waiting for the test results. I really expected that. I didn't know if he was going to get tested or not, but I don't know why. Just had a hunch. Expected it, so I wasn't shocked. You're a little relieved that it doesn't go on your record in a bad way, but still got to live with the scars and the loss in a sense. Even if it is cheating, it still feels like a loss coming out of it. So I had to wrestle with that for a while. So that was overturned. I think probably should have been a lot harsher penalties. I think you still made money by cheating. You got fined $5,000 and probably made 8 or 10 for the win bonus. So it's like still benefited. And he got back in the cage before I did too. That's surgery. So it's not anything to do with him, but his suspension wasn't very serious. I mean, it wasn't drastic. So.
Now, knowing that he was using PEDs, do you feel that that had a definite impact on the outcome of the fight? And would you want a rematch down the line with him?
I mean, of course they impacted. I mean, I think his justification was, man, I couldn't make the weight without him. Great, fight 205. That's the point. But as a fighter, I feel like I should be able to beat you at 205 too. I feel like I should be able to go up and it's a fight. It's not this fake world where we have weight classes. It's fun, it's important, it controls the sport, it keeps it interesting. But as a fighter, I want to win that regardless. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's just go on to what's coming up to the end of the month. You will be making your big return to the UFC Octagon at UFC Fight Night Dublin. I think Dustin Poirier, Joe Duffy is the main event. You'll be taking on South Africa's Gareth McClellan. How's the training been going on for this fight? And are you finally ready to go back in there?
Yeah, training's good. I think I'm going to peak at the right time, which is always a struggle. But just building, getting better, seeing all the improvements, and I think I'm going to peak at the right time. So it's exciting fighting a guy who kind of represents the best of the entire continent. I think he said that before, and he's the champ down there in South Africa, where the biggest MMA scene, and it'll be exciting.
Right on, man. You'll be, fighting in Ireland. They're known to have some of the most crazy and passionate fans in MMA. The atmosphere last year was, known as one of the greatest, most electric atmospheres in UFC history. A ton of UFC fighters were campaigning to be on this card, putting out tweets on social media, trying to get on it. What was your reaction when you heard that you'd be fighting in Dublin? Are you ready for this crazy atmosphere?
Yeah. So I don't think it'll be more distracting being in Ireland. I don't think there'll be more going on than the last fight when they had two fights in a convention going on in Vegas. But I think the energy will be great. And just ever since I signed with the UFC, the first thing I thought was, I want to fight in Ireland. Like that was one of my goals. Wouldn't that be cool? And be this quick. But I'm super excited about it. Family's super excited about it. I'm just trying to stay focused on work, So Ireland being what it is, everything's focused on fight night. And then once that passes and settles, get the win and get to enjoy that in Ireland. It'll be awesome.
Right on, man. That's going to be a good one. I know the fans are looking forward to it. Let's talk a little bit about your opponent, Gareth McClellan. Without giving away too much game planning, what do you expect to see out of him? Have you watched any film? What do you expect to see when you get in there?
Yeah, I've watched all I can, but I think there's a lot more to him than what you can see on film. Coming from a karate background, he generally ground pounds his guys. He's got most of his wins by rear naked choke. So, I'm excited if he wants to go and try to rear naked choke me. But I think we'll see a lot of new things out of him. So I'm trying to be ready for anything.
Yeah, and he's from South Africa. Obviously, you're here from the United States. This is one of the only fights on the card with two non-European fighters. Who do you think gets the bigger fan reaction come fight night?
Who do I think's going to get the better reaction?
Yeah, do you think the fans will be behind you, or do you think it'll be more behind him?
I would expect a little bit more behind him because his last name's McClellan. But like if you didn't know he was South African, you'd think he was the local,
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting point. And how do you see this one playing out on October 24th? What are your predictions?
I think I'll win. I won't tell you how. I'll put it in the envelope.
Gonna keep it a mystery for us. Okay, that'd be awesome.
And before we let you go, Bubba, is there any sponsors you would like to thank? Maybe you can let the fans know where to find you on social media. I know I follow you on Twitter. You have some good tweets that you put out there. The floor is yours. Anything you want to get out there?
Yeah, I'm real bad about using Twitter. I need to get on that more. I need to post more. But, I appreciate the sponsors that I keep regularly in Cellucor and Hungry Howie's and Bucky Tacos. We got the Reebok deal, so we'll probably have less local sponsorship or small-time sponsorship per fight. But I also want to appreciate Saul Luna. This guy, it's working for A&M, but he's really been helping me out on mobility work and release and the bus and everything. So been huge this camp. And then my coaches, Jared Quant's been taking me up to see Carlos Machado in Dallas a lot, and that's just when a guy like that, just a legend, has time to devote to you at all. It's quite an honor. So it's very helpful.
That's awesome stuff, man. And there he is, the one and only fighting Texas Aggie, Bubba Bush. Bubba will be taking on Gareth McClellan in a matchup which will kick off, which should be a great night of fights. UFC Fight Night Dublin, Poirier versus Duffy, October 24th, on UFC Fight Pass. Thanks for coming on the show today, Bubba, and safe travels overseas.
Hey, thanks for having me. We'll be blessed.
We'll be talking to you, man.
Cheers, man.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bubba. We appreciate it. Yeah, and I just before we get into our talking about this weekend's fights, thought we could do a little bit of a prospect watch. We've done this segment before. There was one guy specifically that stuck out to me big time on Friday night on the prelims of Bellator 143. Steve Garcia. He's a guy probably not known to most MMA fans. Maybe if you follow Bellator intently, you'll know who he is. But he is an excellent fighter. He's 6-0, 23 years old. He's 135 pounds. And I think in a year he will be on Bellator main cards. I think he'll be fighting, maybe a year and a half from now. I think he'll be contending for the belt. The stuff he does is phenomenal for such an inexperienced young fighter. He beat Eduardo Bustillos by knockout, 4:59 of the first round. Before that, I got to see him fight in Connecticut, Bellator 123. He fought Kin Moy, which was a great fight. If Bellator had fight of the night performances, I do believe this would be the one. But the one that you should all look up if you've never seen him fight before, type in on I don't know if it's on YouTube, but SpikeTV.com or Bellator.com has a great database of fights. It has every single fight in Bellator history. You can watch the full thing. Type in Cody Walker versus Steve Garcia. I think that's an awesome fight. It was only 39 seconds long, but as far as two guys just going to war, for those for 39 seconds, that's as good as it's going to get. And I know you didn't get to see a whole lot of the Bellator prelims last week, Johnny, but is there anybody out there right now that's on your prospect watch for this week?
Yeah, I want to say a guy fighting Friday night. His name's Erwin Rivera. He's from the Black Zillions. He's only 4-0. He's a guy that has 2 knockouts and 2 decisions. He's a guy that's I've seen him fight once or twice before. He's improving as he goes along. It seems like, and he's in a great camp like the Black Zillions. You're only going to get better. He fights on Legacy. I think he's a guy to watch out for. A guy, like I said, he may, I'm expecting him to maybe lose one fight coming up through the ranks, but he's a guy at 4-0. I think he's going to have a really bright future in the sport, and if he keeps progressing like he is now.
All right, man. We'll definitely have to follow those two, see if our predictions come true. But moving on, we had a little bit of news, not so much since the last time we talked. Things have kind of slowed down. The UFC hasn't announced many fights. Bellator's been cranking out, trying to go to work to hopefully fill up these cards ASAP. They have an event which I'll be attending at the Mohegan Sun next month, Bellator 144. They still don't have a full card for that event. Michael Venom Page is still waiting on an opponent. But one fight that was added was, it's pretty interesting to me that it's going to be on the prelims. I thought this was a main card caliber fight. Is Gordy Yamamuchi is going to fight Isao Kobayashi. Kobayashi is the former king of Pancrase. I think he's 26 years old. He's got a handful of finishes. Only 2 losses on his record. He's a guy that I think he was probably being looked at by the UFC as well. And he's taking on a very tough, very exciting Goiti Yamamuchi. And that should be a very fun fight especially for prelims. I don't know what your thoughts are on that one, Johnny, if you look at it the same way that I do.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked it was on the main card. I think there's going to be an exciting scrap, and I think maybe the winner of this fight, they could. I don't know how much Bellator is going to loan the new startup Japanese organization, but I think either one of these fighters could possibly end up on that show if they win. So they may give a big time fight lined up, even though this one isn't on the main card. I kind of look at it like that way. But as far as the actual in ring, I think it's going to have to be fireworks. I can't wait to watch this fight.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And one other thing that I've noticed, from the press release for this fight as well is that Bellator is it looks like they're going to start doing 4-fight main cards for their shows other than the tent poles. They've done this for Bellator 143, Bellator 141, and now Bellator 144. They only have 4-fight main cards, which I'm not really sure if I like that idea. I think, for fight nights on TV, where you're not having a ton of top tier talent, that you should be putting 5 fights on TV. I don't know if you really have a preference, if it really matters to you, but that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, they've done this before. It seems like they switch up every now and then. They used to do it during I know a couple years ago when they first went on Spike TV, it was kind of obnoxious because one of the tournament fights, the opening, 4 fights in the opening round would always usually end up on the prelims. That was kind of obnoxious, but yeah, I personally like to see more MMA on my TV, so I like 5 fights, but I don't feel strongly either way. I guess I should say.
Yeah, man, and I mean, I think we'll see what they do if they end up sticking with it or not. But a couple other fight announcements. One more Bellator. Bubba Jenkins was announced today. He's going to fight Jordan Parsons, who had an impressive win over what's his name, Julio Neves, who was 30-1, 23 years old. One of the top prospects out there, and Parsons just shut him down and submitted him. And he's going to, now he's got a big step up in opponent as far as experience, American experience and top tier experience goes. He's fighting Bubba Jenkins, always game, good veteran. I think this is a fun fight and a good addition to Bellator 146.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to the guys that are trying to establish themselves in the featherweight division. Obviously, Bubba Jenkins with his wrestling credentials, and he's been around in Bellator for a couple years now. He's probably going to be the favorite for sure. But this is a big chance for Parsons to upset him and maybe expand his career onto the upper echelons of the Bellator 145-pound division.
Completely agree, man. Prospect building. Jordan Parsons, another one, another guy built from the ground up. Look for that to happen more and more and more. And I think Scott Coker's doing a good job, no matter what people say. He's definitely getting people talking about Bellator, and him legitimizing it by bringing in these prospects and building these prospects is awesome. But moving on to the UFC, only one fight announcement since the last time that we spoke. UFC 193. It was actually an injury to Ricardo Abreu. He is out of his fight against Daniel Kelly, and he is replaced by none other than the creepy weasel, Steve Montgomery. Tough 21, I believe, veteran.
Yep.
He had a disappointing loss down at 170. He'll be moving up to 185 for his second UFC fight. This is kind of an interesting matchup, man. This is going to be some freakish styles going on in this one. It's going to be pretty wild.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. Steve Montgomery's a guy that I think 185 maybe suits him better. He's a pretty big guy from what I've seen of him. So he's going to go up to 185, and Daniel Kelly, judo Olympian for Australia. It should be interesting, styles clash. Hopefully, we'll see just a good fight. I can see going either way. Montgomery's a guy that struggled to get fights on the regional circuit because he was actually had such a, he was kind of highly not highly touted is the right word, but he was a very polished, good fighter, and a lot of guys in the regionals didn't want to fight him, so he got the short notice call. The UFC lost, but he's going on. Maybe he's coming in on short injury replacement, so maybe a little bit of short notice, but we're far out enough where he'll probably get some good training in, and hopefully we'll see a great fight.
Yeah, man, I think it should be interesting, and definitely the stylistic matchup will be one that definitely want to keep an eye out for. The last piece of news, it's not a fight announcement or anything, but probably the biggest piece of news that we've had this week, John Jones had his court date, and he got a plea deal, 18 months probation, which does not prohibit him from fighting. So the UFC, I guess, has hired a law firm. They're going to review the deal and make a determination on whether or not John Jones is going to return to the octagon and when, which is like they could have just said he's going to fight Daniel Cormier in April in New York, because I don't know. I don't see the UFC preventing Jones from fighting. There's no way they're doing that.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to see UFC take a little stronger stance, maybe put him on a little more suspension, make sure. But he's that's how I personally would like to see it. But it's all about money. He'll get probably a fight. Yeah, probably the winner of Gustafsson Cormier this weekend. He'll probably get that fight in 2016, probably the beginning of 2016. So it'd be interesting. I'm kind of glad, I do want to see him return to the octagon, but I don't see. I'm with you. I don't see UFC stopping him fighting. I think he's gonna get a fight pretty soon.
Yeah, and right along with this, I guess there is one other piece of news that kind of I blanked on, was that the UFC is going to attempt to hold a show at Madison Square Garden April 23rd in New York. Obviously, MMA is not legal in New York right now. But they're taking an interesting approach here. They publicly came out and said that they had reserved that date and that they were going to bring it to a federal court to have them determine if the ban on mixed martial arts in New York is unconstitutional, claiming that it violates the First Amendment, freedom of expression, and also that they have significant losses due to the fact that the state of New York will not allow them to fight there. I think this is actually a pretty good move. It's kind of the opposite of what they've been doing up until this point. They're actually going out and trying to get it versus, kind of sitting back and hoping that the court's, waiting for a court decision. I think this puts a lot of pressure on this decision to get made once and for all.
Yeah, I also heard they may get their sanctioning through WKA, World Kickboxing Association, as a possibility that they're going to be, go through them to get the, to sanction it or whatnot. Don't know the details. I've heard about that a couple years ago. Someone said that was an option they could do. So it looks like it might happen. I myself don't care, honestly. I know that's probably not the best way to, I'm hosting an MMA podcast, but I heard Chael Sonnen say this before. Just go to New Jersey. Just go across the river. New Jersey's been one of the pioneering states in allowing MMA. Say, screw you, New York. We'll go to New Jersey. We'll make all our money there. That's my opinion. Obviously, New York is a huge media city. a huge huge stage at Madison Square Garden. So I do see the appeal, but I don't care really. If I was them, if I was Dana White and the Fertittas, I'd tell them to shut up their well, we'll just say shove it somewhere and have the shows in New Jersey. That's just my opinion. But it should be interesting, and I think we'll be hearing a lot about this over the next coming
Yeah,
months.
man, and living in the Northeast and being an MMA fan out here, it's obviously not MMA is not as big out here as it is, say, in Vegas, California, areas like that. But I think honestly, man, for the little amount of MMA that we've had here, every single time they've come, I've seen, through web trafficking and even through like, most of my friends didn't never watch MMA, but then when the UFC came here last January for the McGregor-Seaver fight, they ended up wanting to buy tickets. We went, and now they follow it religiously. So I think that the Northeast has been, yeah, just completely underexposed to this to mixed martial arts, and I think that every time that they do come here, they sell out. They've been to the Garden 3 times. They've sold out every single time. I think the last one they might have just missed the mark as far as the sellout goes. But you even look at like Foxwoods. The shows in New Jersey do really well. Yeah, it just even Bangor, Maine almost got a sellout, and there's not Maine doesn't have a huge population, and they still were able to draw a lot of people there. So I think this is it's grossly under exposed here, and hopefully they make the right choice to come back here more on a regular basis, and maybe they'll send a show your way or two too, try to get that area buzzing, right?
Yeah, man. There's if people don't realize I'm in South Carolina. Obviously there's not a lot of huge cities in South Carolina. They do a lot of shows, local shows here. Nothing too big. In North Carolina, there's actually I wish I had all the details. I'll just give you a basic summary. In North Carolina, you had to have two weigh-ins, a weigh-in, a first weigh-in and a weigh-in again to make sure there's limitations. I don't remember the exact percentages or pounds, but you have to be very close to your weigh-in. UFC did a show, I believe, in 2010, and they did a weigh-in at like midnight the day of the fight. It's pretty much the day before, but at midnight. And they also did one. Bellator had to do that when they were here in 2013. I think that's kind of prohibits a lot of the big shows from coming to North Carolina. Georgia has their fair share of shows. They're getting Legacy in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I'm sorry to go on a tangent, but yes, I would definitely love to see the UFC send some shows down here. Dana, if you're listening, send some shows down here, please.
I do have to,
That's all I have to say about
I do
that.
have to say I think they're going in the right direction. With expansion, I think they went on a very global outlook on this whole thing. But I have noticed, in fairness to them, in the last year that they have done a better job of expanding the U.S. shows. Going to Arizona and New Mexico and going up. They've been to Florida 3 times in 20 months or something like that. And now they're coming to Boston every year, or hopefully they're coming every year. So I think they are making the right moves. But like you said, there's places closer to New York that they could put those shows on. New Jersey, Foxwoods. So hopefully this, it'll be interesting to see when the schedule comes out what it looks like. But enough about that. You want to move on? Let's go. UFC 192 this weekend. I think it's the best top to bottom card that we've had this year. The only other one that sticks out to me, if you're talking top to bottom, UFC 189 was obviously good, but UFC 187 I think was the best top to bottom card on paper up until this one. I think this one's better.
Yeah, this one really gives Fight Pass value. I mean, a lot of people complain, "Oh, it's just $10. I can't, you don't get anything." Shut up. Pay your $10. You spend that much on McDonald's, throughout the month. Sorry to go on a rant, but yeah, but what I meant is Fight Pass. This is an awesome. These 4 fights are long, worth $10. Opening up with Derek Lewis versus Victor Pesta. That's gonna be a great fight. Even you got Chris Carriazo versus Sergio Pettis. Sage Northcutt's debut, and then Islam Makhachev versus Adriano Martinez. That fight, in my opinion, should be on Fox Sports 1. Let's jump into it. Let's preview it. What do you think about this opening bout, Nolan? Derek Lewis versus Victor
Yeah, I
Pesta?
think it's interesting. Just looking it over now that they switched the lineup up from yesterday when I looked on here. But as far as the ordering of the bouts go, we'll get to that. Why they did that in a second. But Derek Lewis versus Victor Pesta is a great fight to start off the night. I think that Pesta's one of the few guys in the UFC heavyweight division that has a very good ground game, but he also has some abilities on the feet. He's got to sharpen his tools up there. We saw in the Magomedov fight, he was able to actually hurt Magomedov, I think 1 or 2, maybe twice in the fight. So he's got good hands. And then Lewis is kind of, I can't really get a gauge on him, man. I just, he goes in there, he looks, just absolutely destructive off the bat. He gets a step up in competition against Mitrione, and he gets squashed. And then he fights Ruan Potts, who had Lewis actually down at one point on the ground, and then he just got KO'd by Sean Jordan with a hook kick and punches. So it's kind of hard to get a gauge on him, but I'm going to lean with Lewis. I think Lewis will end up being able to catch Pesta, and I think this is kind of more of a must-win for Lewis than it is for Pesta.
Yeah, I think Pesto may show some good moments in the fight, but I think Lewis might put him out with Lewis has had really good power, and I'm with you, man. He's a hard guy to gauge. He seems to beat the guys he should, and I know I use that expression a lot. But he beats the guys that he should, and kind of struggles against the guys that maybe are above him. But I think he takes this one, and man, that's a great fight to open up tonight. I
Yeah,
think.
great stuff, man. And just continuing on, like you said, people are getting their money's worth out of the Fight Pass cards, or excuse me, the Fight Pass prelims. Next up, we have Chris Carriasso versus Sergio Pettis. This is a very interesting matchup. Pettis losing to Ryan Benoit, back at UFC, the one in Dallas. I'm drawing a blank.
185.
185. And then he ends up getting a huge step up in competition as far as the rankings go. And this will be an interesting matchup. There's obviously a large age difference, 12 years. What do you see? What do you think about this one? Do you think that Pettis is ready for this step up?
You're very interesting. He has the loss, but the thing is, Kyrgios has kind of been on a downfall. He lost against Demetrius Johnson. He lost against Cejudo, and those fights. I think they want to kind of give him maybe a step down a little bit. And he fought Louis Smolka. I thought Louis Smolka would probably win him. Probably beat him. Probably beat him. He won the fight. I kind of feel it going the same way. I think Sergio Pettis on paper might be the more attractive option. He's younger. Maybe has a little more power, like one punch power, I guess, for flyweights. But I think Kyrgios will show his veteran experience and take this one in a decision.
Man, I completely agree with you. I just think that Pettis is. I think he is one of the most rushed fighters in the UFC. I don't know why he started out his career at 135 in the UFC. I know it worked out a little bit for him there, but then kind of failed miserably. He fought his whole pro career up until that point at 125. This is his natural weight. I think he did look a lot better his last fight, but I think that he loses to a guy that's kind of nobody was expecting him to win.
Hey, you went out, man. I don't know if you can hear me.
Not be somebody that should compete for a title. I think he's better than somebody that is unranked and hasn't been proven. So I'm going to go with Carriasso on this one.
Hey, you went out for a little bit. Do you want to restate that? And we'll just read
Okay.
it. Okay, give us 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, man. I just think I kind of I agree with you on this one. Chris Carriasso, I think will take it. He's an example. This is an example of a matchup that to me doesn't make any sense. I think you can say what you want about Pettis. He always got a lot of promise. He's so young. He's had some shining moments where some real potential has shined through. But honestly, man, he's been completely rushed along. I don't really understand why they did that. They decided to go that route with him. They put him in a weight class to start off that he wasn't his natural weight class. Now that he's at 125, I think that he did look good against Ryan Benoit, but he also got knocked out brutally in the third round by a guy that he should have killed. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. Carriasso's only 2 fights away from a title shot. So it's an interesting, if you have a system to making fights, I don't really understand how this would fit in with what the UFC is trying to do here.
Yeah, I agree with I said pretty much the same thing. The next fight is a guy that's gotten a lot of hype recently. Sage Northcutt, 19 years old. I believe he'll be the third youngest UFC debut in the history of the UFC, taking on Francisco Trevino. This is a good fight. Sage Northcutt, I may go on a little tangent here. I'm sorry, but he's 19 years old. It's honestly win, lose, or draw in this fight. I think he wins. I think he's going to beat Francisco Trevino. This is a huge step up. But I think Northcutt he's going to have the hype behind him. He's going to have, it's in Texas where he's from. I think he's going to pull it off. But the thing about it is win, lose, or draw. I know a lot of people would say, oh, no, if he loses, they're going to say, he wasn't that great. Northcutt needs to go back. But he's 19 years old. He's a guy that he could afford a loss or two. He's so young that even if he loses 1 or 2 times, he can always come back to the UFC. He's always growing. He's like Joe Rogan says, he's one of those guys that's in the developmental stage. So he may come out and not look that great or one fight, but in the next fight he could be awesome. This is a big step up for him. If you look at his competition on the Sherdog or something like that, he's mainly fought losing fighters. He beat Rocky Long in his last fight that we talked about a couple weeks ago, who is a veteran but has a losing record, journeyman style. I'm leaning towards Northcutt. But I think Trevino is a guy that's well-rounded. He has 4 wins by knockout, 4 wins by submission, and 4 wins by decision. So, or submission, I'm sorry. He has 4 wins in each category. He's just a really well-rounded fighter, but I'm leaning towards Northcutt in this one.
Yeah, I am too. It's the first prospect of our prospect watch to make it to the big show. So that was thrilling for me. But yeah, man, I can't remember the last time that a fighter coming in from not a major promotion has been hyped up. I literally cannot remember, that ever happening. And now he's fighting a guy, Francisco Trevino, who's 12-1, and Northcutt's only 5-0. They think, I'd say the majority of people think Northcutt's going to steamroll him. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think Trevino's a very durable guy. He has 12 wins, like you said. He's very well-rounded. He looks are deceiving with him. He doesn't look very intimidating. He looks kind of awkward, kind of flat-footed, but it works for him. He pummeled Rene Forte in his debut, and his last one he dropped to Johnny Case, who is a top prospect. So I think this will be a tough test for Northcutt, especially where he's kind of, I'm not going to say squash matches, but he's kind of got some, real mismatches going on. In Legacy, I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago. He fought Rocky Long, who's a guy that came out of retirement on short notice and had a 20-33 record. So that's not like he's fighting the top tier competition here. He's fighting guys that are, on the bottom of the local circuit. So, yeah, definitely interesting with this one. I'm going to make sure to watch the UFC's. Dana White's looking for a fight special on Fight Pass. It focuses on him. So I'll check that out. And, yeah, man, I'm going with Northcutt by. I'm not going to say he gets a decision.
Yeah, and that's a good fight. Our next fight is another guys. They're more established, obviously. Islam Makhachev versus Adriano Martinez, or Martins. I'm sorry, not Martinez. Adriano Martins, who's a guy that fought Cowboy Cerrone, lost to him via head kick. He fought Ruslan Khabilov, who everyone thought was going to be the next, lost to Ben Henderson, but everyone thought he was going to be the next big prospect, and he beats him in a pretty boring fight. I'm kind of leaning towards Martins in this fight. I think it's going to be good. Makhachev is a great prospect, so I can see this one either being a true coin flip, but whoever wins this should definitely get a step up in competition at the UFC, the crowded UFC lightweight division.
I agree, man. I think Makhachev was really impressive in his last fight. I know he was fighting a guy that's kind of at the bottom of the division, Leo Kuntz, but yeah, this is a great matchup for both of them. I love this matchmaking. You got Adriano Martins, who's a very underappreciated fighter. I think he's pretty top tier. He just came off a win against Ruslan Khabilov, a big upset. And he's taken on, the top prospect. So this is Makhachev's time to shine. If he wants to break through, make a push to get into the rankings, I think that he's going to have to take down Martins, and I think that he will get it. I think it'll be a close fight. But I don't even want to pick this one honestly. But if I had to, I'm going to lean slightly towards Makhachev.
Yeah, that's a great fight there. And then we jump onto the prelim, Fox Sports 1 prelims. Rose Namajunas versus Angela Hill. I don't like this bout, honestly. I know Namajunas doesn't have a lot of experience, but obviously she showed on the show she's top tier of the UFC strawweight, Ultimate Fighter season 20. She was the runner-up, fought for the title, lost. But I think she's going to be out. I think Angela Hill's going to be outmatched. I think Namajunas is probably going to take this one. I could see by submission. Angela Hill's a striker by nature, so maybe she gets submitted. But I can see it going to decision as well.
Yeah, man, I think that the female MMA divisions are so bizarre. You look at these two, and they're top 15 in the world, and then you look at their fights, and they're like, only like 8 fights between the two of them or something like that. And yeah, man, I agree with you. Namajunas, I think on paper has less fights. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she has less fights on paper. I think she's the more polished fighter. She obviously has some good resources as far as training goes. I know Pat Barry obviously is her fiance. He's been working with her on a lot of different things. But yeah, I think Angela Hill has a lot to work on. I think Namajunas has a lot to work on, but Namajunas is more polished at this point, and I'm going to take her by submission in the second round.
Our next fight is a welterweight bout between Alan Jouban and Albert Tumanov, two big prospects in the 170-pound division. I'm leaning towards Tumanov. I think he's a legit guy that's going to give people problems. I think Joe Bain's a legit fighter as well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not discrediting him, but I think Tumanov's a little more polished at this point in his career. I think he takes the fight in a very close split decision. What do you think about that, Nolan? You agree with me, or are you feeling the other
I'm
way?
going to swing the other way a little bit, just because I think that, in my opinion, I think Joe Biden every fight has shown some significant improvements. I know he only has 2 finishes in his UFC career thus far, but I think that that's part of the reason is because he's had such tough opponents. I think he's going to beat Tumanov by decision, but man, I can see this going either way. I think this is a very overlooked fight, a very fun fight between two guys that are have had a couple, 3 or 4 fights under their belt, but at the same time are still in that prospect range a little bit. Man, I can't complain about this matchmaking. I don't see how anybody could.
Yeah, this was a fight that I was kind of shocked they didn't put on the main card. Maybe it's the opener just because these guys are, Joe Bain usually brings it, and Tumanov's a good prospect. Where you go on the next fight, which is my pick. If you follow me on Twitter, I've been saying this. Fight of the night, Yair Rodriguez versus Dan Hooker. I'm going to lean towards Rodriguez. I think he's a little more polished, maybe. Dan Hooker's a exciting fighter. They're just coming off his knockout of Hatsu Hayoki in Japan, or no, sorry, in Australia in May. A great knockout. This fight's awesome. I think Rodriguez is going to take it, but I think it go either way for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I'm on the Rodriguez bandwagon as well. Charles Rose is such a tough guy, and they had such a war, but Rodriguez was never really in trouble in that fight. I think Rosa had him down a couple times in good positions, but Rodriguez, for a guy that's only had 6 pro fights, a guy from Mexico, which is kind of, people dump all over the tough Latin America, but man, he brings it. He's exciting. Hooker, on the other hand, kind of an overachiever in my opinion. He's 2-0 in the UFC, I think, and he's a guy that had a huge upset against Hatsuyoki last fight. Both these guys are a lot of fun. They're kind of sloppy, which even provides for more fun. So yeah, man, if this one fight of the night, like you just said, I would not be shocked. But yeah, good stuff, man.
Yeah, the the headliner for the Fox Sports One card is a flyweight bout. Top contenders, possibly, maybe outside of Cejudo, these guys will be the next ones in line. Joseph Benavidez versus Ali Bagutinov. Bagutinov coming off the suspension for performance-enhancing drugs. I'm going to say probably the upset on paper, Bagutinov. I think he's going to win. I know it'll probably be pretty even odds-wise, but I think Benavidez obviously has more name recognition, but I think Bagutinov is going to win the fight, and I think he's going to get one step closer to the UFC title shot.
And I'm gonna have to disagree. I think it's like I've always said. It's hard to catch a gauge on guys after they come off these steroid suspensions because you don't really know how much it factors in. There's a lot of different drugs out there. A lot of them are taken. I do believe that some of them are. I wouldn't say a lot, but I do believe some of them are taken by accident. They're traces of things that you wouldn't even think had steroids in them. They're weight cutting supplements, stuff like that. So I think it'll be interesting to see where he exactly falls as far as the range the range of where he could possibly be as far as his skills are. I'm going to take Benavidez in it. I just think he's the better fighter. He's more dependable, and you just kind of have that unknown of what exactly how much aid that the steroids gave Ali Baghatinov.
Yeah, the next fight's on the main card, opening up the main card, women's bantamweight bout. Juliana Pena, Jessica Ai. I'm going Juliana Pena. I think she'll be the bigger fighter. I think she has a better ground game. I think she's going to pull the upset. I actually, I should see the odds. I've seen a lot of people picking Pena, but
Pena's
I feel like Jessica Ai's. She's three.
Yeah.
Wow, I was off. I thought it'd be a pretty close
Me
fight.
too.
Yeah, Jessica Ai, she's good, but she's kind of undersized for the 135-pound division in my opinion. And I think Pena is a tough, really tough scrapper. No one picked her to win the Ultimate Fighter, season 18, and she showed up and dominated, and I think she takes this fight.
Yeah, man, I can totally see that happening. I go back and forth in my head because I was expecting Ai to kind of get finished early on again the Tate fight, or at least dominated, for the whole time. But the Jessica Ai that we saw in that first round was phenomenal, and I just keep thinking about that in my head. And this is a huge step up for Pena. her last opponent was trying to throw punches off her back at one point when she was in mount. I just think that there's a big difference in talent in the women's 135 division from the prelim fighters to the main card. Top 10, top 15 fighters. So I think that I'm going to lean with I on this one. I could totally see Pena taking it, but I think I, due to experience, due to level of competition she's gone against, I'm going to lean with I.
Oh wow, we don't agree on anything this today. I don't believe. Our next
You
fight.
should keep score going, dude.
Yeah, maybe we'll keep a score going on here. But our next fight is one that I think we may disagree on as well. Sean Jordan taking on Ruslan Magomedov. Heavyweight fight. Ruslan Magomedov is 2-0 in the UFC with victories over Victor Pesta and Josh Copeland. Sean Jordan more established in the UFC. This fight's gonna be good too, I believe. Um, you know, Magomedov's a guy that he has. I don't think he has a lot of finishes for a heavyweight. I think his last four fights have went to decision. Obviously, he's been fighting some tough guys. I think Sean Jordan will win this. I just think Sean Jordan has the ability to finish the fight. Obviously, they're heavyweights, so either one probably has a lot of power. Sorry, both of them have a lot of power. So you're going to see a great display out there. I think Sean Jordan gets the win just by experience. I think he'll finish the fight sometime within the first two
Hey,
rounds.
we agree on this one. I'm going to go with Jordan as well. I think he's a very underappreciated heavyweight. He's a guy that when he fights the main card level fighters, top ranked fighters, he seems to choke. He's been knocked out a couple times. Gabriel Gonzaga and Matt Mitrione both finished him. Those are the only two ranked opponents that he's fought. At the time that he fought him. But I think Sean knows, how to deal with these guys that are big. I think a lot of the people that think Magomedov is going to win this think, the reach is obviously going to be a factor. But Magomedov doesn't necessarily have the punching power that some of these other heavyweights do. If you're going on who's a harder hitter, I think Sean Jordan is a far harder hitter than Magomedov is. So if he can get inside and give Magomedov some problems, touch him up a little bit, I see Jordan being able to finish him. I know, Victor Pesta, who we just talked about, he's a ground fighter for the most part. He was able to rock Magomedov a couple times. So yeah, I think it'll be a close fight. I'm going to say Sean Jordan's going to win second round TKO.
Right on. We do agree on that one. Our next fight is, I'm going to call this maybe the upset. I don't know how the odds are exactly. You may know them off the top of your head. Ryan Bader, Rashad Evans. I'm going Bader. I think Bader's hitting his prime. He's faded in big fights, but I think he's at that point where he's going to make a run, one last run for it. I think he beats Rashad Evans. Rashad Evans, the main thing going against him, great fighter, don't get me wrong, but he's been out for so long. I think it's going to affect him. I think Ryan Bader will get the decision in a fight. I think a lot of people will be shocked that Bader takes this one.
Yeah, man, and I think that this is, like you said, I'm actually going to agree with you on this one too. A lot of people are very easy to count Ryan Bader out. They're very quick to jump the gun and say, oh, he's garbage whenever he fights top tier guys. That Phil Davis performance was very impressive. Davis obviously isn't the most exciting fighter, and he kind of falls in the same category as Ryan Bader, as a guy that is kind of written off by a lot of MMA fans. But yeah, I think this is going to be finally going to be that win that Ryan Bader has wanted his whole career, the one that puts him right in line for a title shot. I don't think he'll choke. Rashad, in my opinion, has been out for a while, which is always a big red flag for me. It's not always a proving factor, as we saw last week with Josh Barnett. But I just think he's been out forever. He's been injured. I've seen pictures of him when he first started training camp, and he looked pretty, out of shape as well. I think Bader's going to get it done.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And like we said, another close matchup in our co-main event, Tyron Woodley versus Johnny Hendricks. This one's so close. The guys obviously wrestled, Oklahoma State and Missouri respectively before. There's a lot of bad feelings between this, but I'm going to lean towards Johnny Hendricks. The reason I'll tell you why: championship experience. He has the the 5 round. Even though this isn't a 5-round fight, he has the experience of going the distance with GSP, Robbie Lawler. And Woodley's a great fighter in his own, don't get me wrong, but he's lost against the top guys for the most part. Lost to Rory McDonald, a fight which he didn't really pull anything. He seemed very tentative in that fight. He lost to Jake Shields in a very close fight. He also lost to Nate Marquardt, who was at the time was the was in Strikeforce. So he seems to struggle against the top tier guys. Obviously, he's coming off a win over Kelvin Gastelum, who I consider in that top that top tier, the top 10 or 15. Dong Young Kim's another guy he beat. But he seems to struggle against the top, 4 or 5 guys. I think Johnny Hendricks will take this victory. A lot of people have been onto Hendricks after the Lawler fight. Even he fought Matt Brown, and people called it a boring fight, but I think Hendricks gets it done.
Yeah, man. I think we're 3 for 3 on the main card so far. Or 2 for 3, 2 for 4, 3 for 4 on the main card. Jesus, I can't do math. That's why I'm not a math major. But yeah, man. Let me just preface this by saying, did you see Embedded, the first episode?
I didn't get to see it.
Johnny
No.
Hendricks looks phenomenal. His shape, he's ripped, man. I think he's finally understanding what it means to be a champion again. He's you don't have to worry about him missing weight this time, that's for sure. He's getting some abs and not the 1-pack. He's getting the 6-pack. Man, I think that this is going to be the best Johnny Hendricks that we've seen. I think he realizes that this time is now. He poses a bad threat for Woodley, in my opinion. Woodley's had some problems with guys not directly engaging with him, kind of standing on the outside, but he's also had problems with guys taking him down. And I think Hendricks can, do either one of those, impose either one of those game plans on Woodley. Woodley's had a lot of success with guys that like to push forward. And Hendricks, I think, is going to wait for Woodley to come in and try to knock him out, and he's just going to take him down. And I think it's going to be very similar to the Matt Brown fight.
Yeah, I think it'd be an interesting fight. That's a great co-main event, but our main event of the evening, Daniel Cormier defending his UFC light heavyweight title against Alexander Gustafsson. Interesting fight. I'm leaning towards Cormier. I don't think Gustafsson, he showed great great skill in that John Jones fight. I just think Cormier is a little different, of a fighter. Obviously, I think Cormier has the wrestling advantage. I think he's gonna. I honestly think we may see a boring fight. As far as I think Cormier is gonna try to take him to the ground. Gustafsson obviously is coming off a loss against Anthony Johnson, where he got knocked out. Cormier did get knocked down by Johnson in their fight at UFC 187, but I think Cormier's chin's not that Gustafsson has a questionable chin or anything, but I think Cormier's chin is a little more tested. He fought some heavyweights and stuff. I think he controls his fight on the ground, and I think he picks up a decision win. Gustafsson has a chance, so don't get me wrong, I'm not counting him out. I just, for some reason, ever since this fight's been announced, I just felt that Cormier is going to take the victory. And heck, who knows? We may see Cormier versus Jones too in February or March, depending on how they handle his situation.
For some odd reason, I'm not really sure why. Like, I haven't really, in my head, usually when I go into the show, I kind of know who I'm going to pick in the fights. For some reason, I haven't thought about this one too much. I think it's probably because we have so many exciting fights coming up. But for the first time on air, I'm going to go out here and say that I'm going to pick Daniel Cormier as well. And the X factor to me here is going to be Alexander Gustafsson's ground game. Looking over Alexander Gustafsson's opponents, the last time that he fought like a true ground fighter was Phil Davis, and that was back in 2010. He got choked out in the first round, the Anaconda choke. And obviously, from what I've heard, Davis ended up going to train with him, and he got Gustafsson's wrestling a lot better. With that being said, he's never fought a wrestler like Cormier, in my opinion. And, the X factor is going to be just how good is Alexander Gustafsson's ground game. Because he's never been proven. It's never been really tested. He's fought Rumble, Manua, John Jones, Rua, Thiago Silva, and Matt Yushenko all in a row. That was going back to 2011. So yeah, man, I think that DC's wrestling is very, very, very good. And I think there's only one man in this division out there that can beat him, and that man's John Jones.
I agree with you there. It looks like we pretty much agree on most of the main card bouts, and I'm looking forward to this whole fight card. Like you said, UFC 192, Houston, Texas. UFC returns to Texas for the first time since UFC 185, if I'm not mistaken. Going to be a great night of fights, top to bottom. I can't wait. And next week we will have the recap. And how about a fighter? We got anyone coming on next week? Are you still working on the details?
Oh man, I think we have some things in the works, man. I don't want to drop any bombs too early, but I'm going to make another guarantee that we'll and we have another one.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll do 2 guests this week. How about that?
2 guests this week. I'm down for it, guys. As we're signing off, any last words, Nolan?
No, man, I'm just excited to see the fights weekend and keep moving forward from here in what will be the best 3 months in MMA, in my opinion, of all time.
Absolutely, man. So for Johnny Brown and Nolan King, we're signing off this week. I hope you guys have a great day. You can check us out on Facebook, facebook.com. You can search it up, Kneebar MMA. Also on Twitter, Kneebar Podcast. All our videos are going on YouTube. All our recordings, our interview with Bubba Bush is going on there. Everything will be on our YouTube channel. So check that out, Kneebar Podcast. Just put in your YouTube search button, it'll come up. Thank you for joining us, and I'm signing off. Adios. See you later.